Get started.
So,
you right?
This is great. No, actually, this is our second one. I don't know. Quick show of hands who was the last one on October. So it's great actually to see so many new people show up. We actually got a wee bit overwhelmed this time around. We actually sold out like most of the places in like 2 days after posting them, which is great. We're going to be planning to do quite a lot more of these this year. Quite a good lineup of people. So we'll probably get a good 7 or so meetups this year, which is going to be really good. We actually have one next month on the 21st of March. There'll be a bit more details put out on our Twitter page and stuff like that. Send out an email. Just try to confirm the venue. It's probably going to be in Ormo Bath. It's going to be about open source as well. It'll be a really good one to come to. But yeah, I'm not really going to say very much today. I kind of stuff to do sponsor stuff. So thanks to Instil, great offices, great space for me. So thanks to Instil for hosting, and thanks to Phillips have sponsored the food and the drinks and stuff. So that's really great. Also, need to say thanks to Domain Driven Design Europe. So for those of you who don't know, it's an annual conference. It's just been there in end of January. They're really good. They send us a lot of swag. So they send a whole bunch of stuff. So there's these little magazines. They're not made domain-driven design. There's in the end of that too. Yeah. So there should be, there's like 4 of them or something. So just grab one and take it. It's a really good summary. But yeah, really great conferences. I definitely recommend going to that if you get an opportunity. The only thing that they asked to do was mention them and show some of their training courses. So they have some training stuff coming up. We can actually get a €100 discount if anyone's actually interested in going to this. Let me know, I can get you the link. So there's €100 off these training courses, all about domain-driven design. And that's basically all I have to say. I did actually forget one thing that I'm going to create a slide for. So last year, I think, was 15 years since the original writing of the domain-driven design book. And to create an ebook, I went to create a slide and put a link on it, but I just forgot. So it's called 15 Years of Domain-Driven Design. If you Google it, it's on LeanPub and it's free to read, and it's a collection of essays from people across the domain-driven design community. So I definitely recommend giving it a read. But that's it. That's all I have to say. So I'm going to hand you to first Garth, who's going to talk about the philosophy of domain-driven design. And I have a whole list of stuff that I can't remember. And then we have Mario Sullivan, who's come up from
Gory.
Yep.
It's actually called Gory.
Gory. Gory. Talking about mapping constraints. So I'm just going to let Gareth just take over. Away you go.
Thank you.
And if you're still clapping like that at the end, it'll be a success. Right, let's just get the slides up. Yay, cool. So this talk is about the philosophy of domain-driven design, and I'm sure a lot of you were thinking, what? Okay, so that's what the talk is all about. So probably most of you have heard me before. My name's Garth Gilmore. I'm the head trainer here at Instil. I started out programming whenever I was 12 on one of these. Anybody ever programmed a Spectrum 48K? Yay, very good. Yep, real developers use rubber keys. So I spent many years happily programming in that, well, about 4, and then I went off to college, and I went to Durham in England. Anybody ever been to Durham? Yay, it's gorgeous, isn't it? Durham is absolutely gorgeous. It's a wonderful little cathedral city in the north of England. Don't take my word for it. Take Bill Bryson's. If you're familiar with Bill Bryson, very famous travel writer, and this is from one of his books about travelling around England. So you've never been to Durham? Dear God, man, you must go at once. Please take my car. So it's gorgeous. So I was there for 3.5 years, doing a degree in philosophy and psychology, and then later on bounced back into IT. But I developed a love for philosophy, which has sustained ever since. So I'm here tonight to try and convince you that there's a very strong, very real, and very important relationship between the philosophy of language, little bits of other philosophy as well, and domain-driven design. Okay? So just to start out, Why philosophy? Why should you care? Why does it matter? Is it not just sitting there debating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin or anything like that? Well, I really recommend you start by watching this talk by John Searle. Okay, so John Searle is a really serious philosopher and deeply interested in consciousness. And he works a lot with neurologists, neurobiologists, and medical clinicians and people like that. And this is from a TED talk he gave about consciousness. And there's this wonderful line in it, and this is when he started working with neurologists. So, very famous neurobiologist said, look, in my discipline it's okay to be interested in consciousness, but get tenure first. Okay, yeah. In other words, the way a science becomes a science is by limiting certain kinds of discussion. Okay, so they say, look, these things here are inside our area, and these things are not. Okay, so if you work within this box, you're a respectable scientist. Okay, if you don't work within this box, well then you're just, we don't want anything to do with you. Okay, so it's like the difference between mathematicians, and numerologists. There's a fine line, but once you cross it, you can't really go back. You don't get invited to parties anymore. So that's kind of where philosophy lives. Okay, so philosophy is what you can do before you can actually experiment. Okay, so before you can do the physics experiment or the chemistry experiment or whatever it happens to be, you can still do philosophy about stuff, like, for example, consciousness. Okay? Because if you can't do anything else, you can work out if your own preconceptions make sense. Okay? So if there's something out there, whatever it may be, and we can't investigate it experimentally, well, at least we can say, okay, let's discover if our own preconceptions make sense. Okay? It's a little bit like database design and normalization. You can never prove that what's in the database is actually true, but you can make sure that all the data in the database is consistent. And that's why we normalize. So the first thing that philosophy is for doing that initial investigation, for kind of clearing the way. And then the way that most people encounter philosophy is through little puzzles. Okay, so this is the Zen way of teaching philosophy. So I'm sure you've heard a couple of little philosophical puzzles in your time. Okay, so for example, let's say the odds of there being a bomb in an aircraft, are 1 in 100,000. Okay, but the odds of there being 2 bombs in an aircraft are 1 in 10 million. Okay, so every time you fly, you carry a bomb with you for safety. So explain why this is wrong, okay? Or the Spanish barber. So the Spanish barber is the guy who shaves everybody in the village who doesn't shave himself. So who shaves the barber? Okay? Or to pick one that's a little bit more relevant to today, this is called the Mexican bandits problem. Okay, so let's say you've got 100 villagers, and each of them is a plate of 100 beans, and then there are 100 bandits. Okay, so on Monday the 100 bandits swoop down and grab a plate of beans off each villager and off they go. So they have a good lunch. But then, let's say on the Monday evening they have a crisis of conscience and discover ethics, okay? And they say, we can't do that, we are now bad bandits, that was wrong, okay? We say, I know what we're going to do on Tuesday, we're going to sweep down from the hills once again, but each of us is going to take only 1 bean from the plate of each villager, okay? So, none of us will have done any particular villager any real amount of harm, okay? But we'll still end up with full stomachs, so this is fine, okay? So, is this wrong? Explain why, okay? And if you can explain why it's wrong, then you could really help us today, because the Mexican bandits are pretty much us, okay? So if you think about the damage that we're doing to the environment, to ecology, through just not recycling that one little thing, or littering there, or not going vegetarian and having that wonderful burger, or that beef burrito instead of the vegetarian. Here the beef instead of a vegetarian. You're killing the planet, you bastards. So whenever we make small ethical choices, we like to think there's some limit. Over this limit, it's an ethical decision. Underneath this limit, what does it matter? Okay. Well, the point about the Mexican bandit is to say that, hold on, even the decisions under this imagined moral limit, they do actually matter. Okay. So, if you're interested in problems like that, there's a great book, The Pig That Wants to Be Eaten, Anybody know that from Hitchhikers? The restaurant at the end of the universe? Yay! So, and 99 other thought experiments, you know? Philosophy asks questions before science can come in. Philosophy asks questions above science. There's this thing called the history and philosophy of science, you know, which asks questions like, how should we regard something as being proved, okay? It watchdogs different sciences, because one science tends to get caught up in itself. So for example, whenever I was doing psychology, there was this obsession with, why do people not think according to the rules of logic? I mean, to be rational is to think according to the rules of logic, and people can be demonstrated not to do that. You know, so this was presented as a great paradox. Yeah, but if you're familiar with logic, of course, you know that the kind of logic that most people refer to is just one of many possible logics. You know, and definitely not the best, and so on. And then certain questions are always going to be philosophical, like questions regarding ethics and so on. Okay, so anybody watch The Good Place? Oh, if you haven't, you have to watch The Good Place. It is absolutely brilliant, you know. And there's the episode where they do like real life versions of the trolley problems. You know, there's a thing. There's the trolley going down the tracks, and it's going to kill 2 people. Yeah, but if you pull the lever, it's only going to kill 1 person. Okay, but you know, should you morally pull the lever? Should you intervene? Should you take agency and so on? You know? So there's all kinds of interesting little variations in that. Yeah. So there's actually a joke website where they have all kinds of weird, insane variations of the trolley problem, which are just great. Yeah. Another one you might have heard of, if you're into your Star Trek, yeah. Have you ever wondered what happens when you get teleported? Yeah? Are you the same person at the other end, or do you just die at one end? Okay? So it's actually a serious question. Like, what happens if in Star Trek the teleporter fails to work properly, which tends to happen from time to time, yeah? And let's say you get beamed down to the planet, but you're also alive on the platform, you know? And the technician goes, damn, I have to tell you this at this point, yeah, up until now you've just been killed. You know, the way this thing actually works is it just kills you and then just creates a copy of you, but in this case it's screwed up, so sorry, Dave. So what would that mean? Yeah. So if you're interested, there's this guy called Derek Parfit, one of my favourite philosophers, who really got into it and said, look, you know, what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be continuous over time, and so on? And he draws this distinction between connectedness and continuity. Okay, so connectedness is like when one mental state drives another. We're all familiar with this from programming. You know, so the current state of the program determines the next state, determines the next state, and so on. You know, so we're happy enough with that with programs, yeah, and we're happy enough that programs don't have continuity. Okay, so a program can have connectedness, yeah, without continuity. In other words, you could have a program that's running, pause it, move it to a different location in memory, start it again, you know, and it'll just keep going, you know. And of course, this is in a sense what's happening with context switches and being put on and off the CPU and all this kind of thing. Okay, so we wouldn't worry whenever it's happening to a program. We do worry if it's happening to us. Okay, you know, that would be a bit of a problem. Okay, so if we were just walking along and then randomly disintegrated and recreated over there, but you could absolutely guarantee that that next mental state was connected to the previous one, would you still be okay with that? You know, probably not. Okay. So all of these are philosophical problems, and quite interesting ones. Probably the most relevant contribution, or rather lack of contribution to philosophy at the minute, is rhetoric. So who's familiar with what rhetoric is? That's the problem. Only a few, okay? So rhetoric is the study of how to make persuasive arguments, okay? So not to find the truth, okay?
Or
what? I don't. Yeah. So not the study of how to find the truth, yeah, but how to make a persuasive argument. Okay, and one of the problems in modern society is that nobody has actually studied rhetoric, and nobody can work out when they're being lied to. Okay, so there are like acceptable techniques in rhetoric, and then there are evil techniques in rhetoric. Okay, so two of them are here. One of them you of course know, because we in Northern Ireland pretty much invented this one. So whataboutism, or also known as whataboutery. Anybody know what whataboutery is? Yay! You know, so autobiography is immediately comparing something horrible that has happened to something before that was horrible, more horrible allegedly. Okay? So Terry Pratchett summed it up wonderfully in his books. It's remember the massacre they committed against us, which will excuse the massacre we're about to commit against them. You know? So that's autobiography. And then the Gishgal, okay? So this is famously used by evangelical creationists in America, where whenever they're trying to defend, you know, a certain point of view, they come up with all of these arguments against evolution, and they just threw them out a million times. You know? So they say, well, evolution can't prove why an eye would occur, or how a bumblebee flies, or why this would happen, or why this microscopic thing is this weird appendage, or whatever. You know? And all of these things can be proved wrong, but for everything they say, you know, for every 30 seconds they spend on something, it would take 10 minutes to prove it wrong. So they kind of drain all the oxygen from the opponent that they're debating. Okay, so these are two like evil patterns, you know, used in rhetoric. Yeah. So if we could all study rhetoric at university or even primary school, would be a lot better. Okay. So anyways, that's a kind of brief little introduction. Turning now to the relationship to DDD. Okay, so here's some code for you, some Kotlin code, because that's my favourite language at the minute. So I have a puzzle for you. Under what circumstances will this function, error in slide. It says that under what circumstances will foobar return false? It should be return true. I apologise. Yeah, so the question is, under what circumstances will foobar return true? Okay, so you see there we've got a main function, and inside the main function we've got foobar, and foobar takes 2 booleans and returns a boolean, and then you can work out what the code is in foobar. Yeah. So my question is, under what circumstances, A, B, C, or D, will it actually return true? A, yes. And that's a problem, okay? Because it will return A, but only according to the rules of logic, okay? And then that's an issue, okay? Yeah. So you see here, we're saying if A is true and if B is true, well then we're all assuming that A and B is true. Okay? Is that necessarily so? Okay? If A is true and B is true, then is it true that A and B are true? Okay? So let's think a little bit about truth. Okay? So you've got mathematical truth. Okay? You've got religious truth. Yeah? You've got moral truth, observational truth, legal truth, aesthetic truth. And counterfactuals. Counterfactuals are horrible, okay? Philosophers hate counterfactuals. You know, if Hitler had not been born, then World War II would not have occurred. Okay, you know, that's a counterfactual statement. Yeah. So, can a counterfactual statement ever actually be true or false? Okay. So there are many, many different truths. Okay. So is it true that we can just randomly combine them together with and or, yeah, and say, well, same thing. You know. So you see here we have two truths. Okay. The set of integers is infinite. True. Street Fighter is a cinematic masterpiece. True. Okay. But does the combination of the two have the same level of truthiness, okay, that each of the individual ones do, okay? Is there one overwhelming concept of truth, okay? Can we put all true things in exactly the same bucket, and then all false things in exactly the same bucket, and then just and or them together and play with them and so on, you know? So, maybe we can, you know, maybe we can't. Great movie, so, you know, that seems a bit strange, okay? But you know, that's a good example of something we've all been brought up with as philosophers, as developers, to assume that there's one particular kind of logic that we can do, but that's something that philosophers get very, very worried about. Okay, so philosophers do want to preserve this bivariance, yeah, this idea that things are either true, yeah, or false, and you can say if A is true, if B is true, then A and B is true, and so on. But quite how we prove that, well, that's an interesting question, you know. So people have tried to approach this in all different kinds of ways, you know. So what does it mean for something to be true? So there's this thing called correspondence theory. Okay, so we say, okay. it's true that there's a flask of water at the table if there is in fact a flask of water at the table. Okay, that's correspondence theory. Okay, well that kind of works, but it can't work for most things that we want to say are true or false. Yeah. Coherence theory, okay? So something can be said to be true if it coheres with, if it fits in with a wider theory, okay? So the bigger the number of facts that come together that make a theory, and the more the theory is coherent with itself, well then the more likely any one statement is to be true. Okay, so that kind of works until you realise that, given all the fan fiction out there, Buffy the Vampire Slayer might be more truthful than quantum physics or something like that. Okay, so are we happy saying that it's just the size of the overall scheme that something is a part of that determines whether or not it's truthful? Okay. Then pragmatic theory, okay? Something is proved true by its utility, okay? So you can take any statement like, this is a fast laptop, and how true that is how that can be actually used. I mean, can I use this laptop to teach various courses and so on? Will it actually run the software that I need? Yeah. But then the trouble is, for other kinds of truths, you end up in the ends justify the means type scenarios. Yeah. And then there's this fancy one called redundancy theory, which tries to explain away truthfulness, to say that truthiness is just some kind of linguistic contrivance. So it starts off by saying, look, we can say it's raining outside, and that's true. We can say it's true that it's raining outside, and that's true. We can say it's true that it's raining outside, and so on. So all these extra layers of truthfulness seem to be very lightweight. They don't seem to add anything, and yet we can do them forever. So they use this to kind of build up an argument that truth and falsity are in some way redundant and just part of the language. Yeah, but it's very hard to do that without ending up being accused of just falling into an infinite recursion. Okay. So hopefully what I'm trying to convince you is that you can take simple things, really simple concepts in programming, yeah, and you can realise that you really don't understand what they are at all. Okay, so hopefully I've started to convince you that whenever we say bully and B, okay, you're not entirely sure what you're dealing with. Yeah? Of course, yeah, there is already plenty of evidence that when developers say bully and B, they might not anyway be entirely sure what they're talking about. Okay, so that was a really good tweet from last year. Okay, so the most evil implementation of this even you can possibly imagine. Okay. So turning our attention from is bullying, yeah, to bigger words. Okay, and this is where the DDD starts coming in. Anybody seen this site here? When cakes go wrong? Yay! Yeah. So this is an amazing site for how people screw up language. Okay. So if you look at the top left, we have basic misunderstanding. It's a grill. Okay. Then good luck, Jerry, with sad faces. Yeah. Then on the bottom left, we have metaphysical. As a philosopher, I appreciate this. I want sprinkles. Okay. So good for you. That's worthy of being put in the cake. And then the bottom right is my favourite, where it was one of those places where they could ice an image onto a cake, and they had a memory stick with an image of the boss who was retiring, teeing off on the golf course. Yeah, so that image was what they wanted iced onto the cake. So you can imagine what happened. Somebody from the kitchen shouts, "What's going on the cake?" And somebody shouts back, "It's on the counter." So they ice a picture of the memory stick perfectly onto the cake. Okay, so whoops. Okay, so we've established that we can't really do booleans. We're not entirely sure what booleans are. Yeah, and then we don't know how to do cakes either. So bigger words are giving us issues. So the philosopher who really looked at this, yeah, and who I would suggest inspired an awful lot of DDD, whether we know it or not, is Wittgenstein. Okay, so Wittgenstein is probably one of the most famous modern philosophers ever. Okay, and one of the things he's famous for is producing two completely different works of genius. Okay, so the first one is not the one that's important to us, but we have to at least mention it so you can understand the later one. Okay, so whenever Wittgenstein first came to Cambridge, he was involved in what's called logicism. Okay, and this was the attempt to take mathematics and explain that mathematics was based on top of logic, and logic was pure and couldn't be argued with. You know, it was an attempt to take all of science, yeah, and put it in very firm foundations. Okay? So what he tried to do was to impose logic to language. Okay? So he came up with this idea that all language is actually painting pictures. Okay? So whenever you're using words, yeah, all words are descriptions of arrangements of things in the world. Okay? So he tried to provide a logical analysis of even how sentences that didn't appear to have anything to do with like real things in the world could actually be traced back to or converted or transformed into statements about real things in the world. Okay? And in this way he tried to show that language could be reduced down to logic, which in turn could be reduced down to arrangements of things in the world. Yeah? And then he said, look, any other kind of sentence other than these is completely meaningless. Okay? So he said, look, all philosophical problems are meaningless because all philosophical problems inherently are from gibberish. You know, from taking the mechanisms of language which do work, yeah, and then just using them in the wrong way. Okay? So he produced this first book called the Tractatus, which ends with this wonderful saying, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Okay? And that sounds like something simple and trite until you realise it's like it was the overwhelming message, yeah, of his entire philosophy. And funny story, PhDs had only recently been introduced, and the academics at Cambridge thought they were absolutely scandalous and a dilution of standards and so on. So the Tractatus was submitted as the equivalent of his PhD thesis. And then G.E. Moore was his examiner, another incredibly famous Cambridge philosopher, and he came out with this wonderful statement. The Tractatus is a work of genius, but otherwise satisfies the requirements for a PhD. You know? So that was his first philosophy, and then he took 10 years off and got inspired to do another one. So he was involved with a bunch of academics in what became known as the Vienna Circle, and realised that his original view was completely wrong. Okay? So he instead recast language as the idea of a set of games. Okay? So he said, look, language is no longer reducible to logic. Instead, we play various language games. Okay? So in the same way that there are many, many, many different games, and each of these games has a different set of rules, but there are family resemblances between these games. You know, they all kind of overlap with one another. Okay? And so, for example, you have chess and drafts. Okay? And in both of those, you have the idea of pieces, yeah, and you have the idea of movement. Okay? But of course, the rules for moving in checkers are completely different from the rules for moving in chess and so on. Okay? So he moved away completely from his first philosophy, and he tried to establish this second philosophy based on the idea of language as being a set of interlocking games. Okay? And he said that, look, confusion occurs whenever we mistake the game being played. Okay? So he said what you should never do is take the rules and assumptions and the kind of terminology and symbols of one game, yeah, and import them into another. Okay? Because all confusion will therefore result. Hopefully it's starting to sound a lot more familiar. Yeah? So he said, look, in both of his philosophies, he believed that philosophy itself was wrong. Okay? He believed that all philosophical problems, yeah, were just confusions. Okay? So in his first philosophy, there were confusions because you totally misunderstood language and you were using language to state gibberish. Okay? Whereas in his second philosophy, he said, no, that's not quite right. Instead, you have these interlocking language games, yeah? But what you've done is you've incorrectly imported expressions, terminology, concepts, rules, from one game into another. And that's a really easy thing to do because they all have this overlapping and interlocking family resemblance, yeah? But we shouldn't do it. Okay? So to him, philosophy is a pursuit that one is engaged in, and the job of being a philosopher is to find and disambiguate these language games, okay? To establish what the games are, okay? To establish what the rules and the symbols are within each game, to kind of tease them apart, yeah? And then to point out whenever people, especially other philosophers, are screwing up, mixing things up, and causing confusion. Okay? And in his later work, which was published after his death, he tried to explain how this related to an awful lot of human psychology. Okay? So here's the actual quote here. By the way, we'll publish these slides. You can read through the quotes yourself. So here's the quote where he actually introduced the idea of language use, and what they are. So hopefully you can now see the link between the philosophy of Wittgenstein, and domain-driven design. Okay, it is of course in the idea of the bounded context. Okay, so I remember whenever I was first exposed to this book, and I bought it shortly after it was published, it immediately occurred to me, hold on, I recognise something here. This whole idea of the bounded context, it like sparked something in my head. I didn't immediately realise what it was. The idea had to kind of bubble in my subconscious for a little bit before I kind of realised that, hold on, bounded context, language game, pretty much the same thing to me. They share the same underlying root. Okay? So Wittgenstein didn't believe that you have normal language and you have language games. He recognized that everything is a language game. Okay? He said that everything we do in life is made up of these series of interlocking language games. Okay? And at any given time, we can of course be playing any number of these games, but they're all separate games. And words have no absolute meaning. Words only have meaning within the current game that you're playing. Okay? So you can't talk about a word having an absolute meaning outside of the context of the game it's being used in. Okay? So here's a really good book here, Through the Language Glass. And this explains how from culture to culture, the language that people speak and the words that they use, how they affect how they think. Okay? So I'm sure you've heard of one example of this. The way that you see colour is determined by the words that you have for colours. Okay? If you don't have a word for a colour, you don't actually see that colour. Okay? So this book makes a really strong case for that. Okay? So the set of symbols, the set of words that you have to describe things can literally affect how you see the world. Okay? Because we all see the same spectrum of colours, but our brain slices it up, in different ways. Okay? And the clues that your brain gets for slicing that spectrum up are determined by context, which is determined by language. Okay? So another more interesting illustration of this, which is used, it's taken from mathematics, by a guy called Kripke. He asks the question, are you an adder or a quadder? Okay, so which of these are you? Okay, well, what the hell is a quadder? Okay, well, let's assume for the minute that everybody in here is an adder. Okay, so our minds have been destroyed by programming. Okay, so all we actually understand is ints. Okay, we don't understand quints. Okay, so what's a quint? Okay, well, a quint is something that, and this is how you would explain it to an adder, where whenever you add the two things together, if the total is less than 57, well then you get the two values added, otherwise you get 5. Okay? But to a quadder it's very simple. Whenever you add two things, you get 56 up to that number, and then after that you get 5. That's just how the brain works. Okay? So let's say we have adders in the world, and then you have quadders in the world. Okay? How would you know which you were if you had not added up to a value greater than 56? Okay, the answer is you wouldn't. Okay? So the point from this example, so here it is in code, by the way. So there's your quit, and we're overloading the plus operator. And then we've got two test methods, one that takes those silly ints, and one that takes quints. And we've got foo and bar. So foo just returns a value, bar builds a quint. So if you were to run this code here, I won't ask what you get because we went through that too quickly. But those are the results you would get there. Okay? So the point from Kripke's example is, imagine you had a population of people, and they'd added their whole lives, okay, but nobody had ever added higher than 56. Okay? So how would you know which were the adders, and how would you know which were the quadders? Okay? And the answer is you wouldn't. Okay? So for any concept that you can think of, how do you know that there isn't some other version running in the next person's head which is identical to yours up to a point that you haven't reached yet? Okay, so, so the idea is that all these concepts that we have in our heads, the only way that we know for sure whether or not we're working together with one another is whenever we're playing one of these language games. Okay, nothing is absolute, nothing is sure, nothing is determined. Apart from its participation in one of these language games. Okay. So, if you want to explore this further, there's a really good podcast on YouTube called Crash Course Philosophy. Anybody familiar with that? Yeah. So there's a really good one on language and meaning, and a couple of others on other aspects of Wittgenstein's work. Well worth looking to. And anybody heard of this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? Anybody? Yeah. So this actually comes in a lot in programming. Because this was the first time I think anybody had stated that the language that you're working in determines the things you are able to say. Okay? That for any given language, once you adopt it, it enables you to say certain things, but it also makes it completely impossible to say other things. Okay? So whenever you choose your primary language, you're not just enabling yourself, you're also limiting yourself. Okay? So is that true or false for natural languages? Discuss. Is that true for programming languages? To discuss even more. Okay? Very good Wikipedia page if you want to get into it. And then, as an example of that, very famous book, this guy called Daniel Everett, he went and lived with this tribe in the Amazonian jungle where nobody had ever bothered to learn their language before. Okay? And he discovered that they have no religion. Okay? They have no concept of God. Okay? As a function of their language. Okay? Because in their language, it's only possible for them to believe something that they have seen, or something somebody that they know has seen. Okay? But because of the way their language is structured, it's not possible for them to believe what a lawyer would call hearsay. Okay? So if you see something and tell him, and then you tell me, I'm not able to believe it. Okay? So they're only able to believe things that they have seen personally, or somebody that they know their first-hand experience of has actually seen themselves. Okay? So absolutely fascinating book, and a really fascinating case study. Okay? So whenever you're talking about bounded contexts, in DDD and so on, I would encourage you not to think of it as this really weird thing that only applies to requirements analysis or software, or that's only one specific way of going out and looking at the world and so on. I would rather encourage you to think of yourselves as A, doing philosophy, B, sitting at the top of a very long and distinguished philosophical discussion, and C, above all, just modelling the way the entire real world actually is. Okay? So DDD isn't some quirky way of looking at the world. It's not some fancy way of doing requirements analysis. What it actually is a very nice formulation of the philosophy of how language itself might actually operate. Everybody okay with that? Yeah. Cool. So, boom. Yeah. Right, so that's all I wanted to say.